Tokenization is just taking a financial asset, or taking any asset for that matter, asset being a store of value, placing it into the blockchain. What you see when you're using large language models is you'll get one answer for one person, you get a different answer for a different person, or even the same person gets a different answer 5 minutes later. That's part of the beauty of a large language model. But when you're coming up with decisions that are based off of certain regulations, you need to make sure that you're getting the same answer. It needs to be deterministic.
Finance in general, not necessarily the fastest moving industry when it comes to, taking that innovative step for all sorts of reasons, regulatory frameworks and otherwise.
When you look at traditional assets versus digital assets, it's really just about how you use them. How are you using these tools? You can use those tools in the same way. You just get more capabilities when you use digital assets. The different AI technologies, having it secured in that way and having it audited and having that auditability from the blockchain, that's what really gets people to jump. And I think that that's what's really exciting about the way that we're approaching AI-enabled tokenized issuances.
Here we go. Jason Dobbs, founder and CEO of ICTI. You got my undivided attention through a friend, as well as AI needs to be infrastructure, not feature, number one. Number two, you helped me understand tokenization in a way that I haven't yet, because we stepped into some art and some digital assets and some cool stories about some artists I know that really would benefit from understanding what you guys are capable of doing. But without further delay, I want to give you a big shout out and say thank you for joining AI with Alec, and would love for you to introduce yourself, and the microphone's yours. You can say whatever you'd like to help folks understand what you guys are building.
Yeah, thanks, Alec. Really excited about joining your show. I like how you always dive into the topics, and you have some really cool conversations. So I'm excited to be a part of that. So I guess a little bit about, I think what I find interesting about what ICTI does is we're doing AI-enabled tokenized issuance of regulated assets, and it's not a space that people really want to jump feet first into when they think of, I want to do a startup. But that's where we really that's where we saw a lot of really interesting things happening from a tech perspective, and a lot of opportunity in the market for where there could be good enhancements in workflow processes, in how AI is being used, and how blockchain can actually benefit the financial infrastructure.
Yeah, I'm just taking a note, because you workflow processes in particular, that is something that's getting on a lot of people's radars a lot faster than I think some thought we would get there, because the ability of AI agents and agentic infrastructure and multi-agent frameworks and chassis and harness, we can go on and on. I think, in my humble opinion, that's probably one of the biggest reasons we're moving so fast in this direction, because people are really feeling the value and seeing the value, and it's measurable. So I don't know if you want to jump right into any areas of agentic stuff, or how you might want to kind of step into it. But I think folks that, listen and watch the podcast tend to love when people kind of get into the nitty gritty and talk technical and talk business at the same time. So feel free to go in any direction.
Yeah, you're jumping just like we did. You jump feet first into it. So when it comes to just saying, hey, let's go and we see a workflow issue, let's go and put AI agents on it. That's a real big sledgehammer approach, when sometimes you just need to have that tiny little jewelry hammer going at something. So what we're doing is we're approaching AI agents and being an AI-enabled platform for tokenization as being, you need to really approach this from the ground up. You need to look at each step of the process separately as you're looking at it as a whole process, start to finish. You need to really be doing both views simultaneously to take advantage and feel safe with how you're approaching AI agents. So that's I guess in a nutshell the approach that we're taking.
For sure. And when you are asked from, let's say, a pilot, customer or prospective customer, they say, hey, we need to be able to explain this to some folks, tokenization, for example, to some folks that have shorter attention spans, aren't necessarily as familiar, and certainly aren't technical. How do you go about explaining, in 90 seconds or less, what tokenization is and how it connects to what people get excited about in the space of digital assets, just in general, to help folks get up to speed? Because I think a lot of people nod, but I don't know that people understand this stuff as well as they might lead on.
Sure, and great question, because I think throughout the conversation, we're going to be talking about AI and AI enablement for our platform in the context of tokenization. So good to lay the groundwork there. Tokenization is just taking a financial asset, or taking any asset for that matter, asset being a store of value, and placing it into the blockchain. So this way you can go and you can take this asset and move it around. As much as the network itself is decentralized. Just fun. You're going to get into decentralized versus centralized real quick. As much as that network is decentralized, you have one single source of truth that's entirely validated by the entire community of people that are utilizing that asset. Now, depending on how you structure everything, you can do it in a very safe manner, where you have this one institution that's going through and managing the way that the blockchain is validating that information, which is that's typically the approach that we see our pilot customers wanting to take, and other institutions want it to be something that's a little bit more open. So different participants, they get consortium of the commercial banks and private banks within a geographic region or within a jurisdiction, going and validating and making sure that this is the way the asset should be. So what we get with tokenization, where we see the real big value add to a lot of organizations, is the asset is more portable. So you can go and you can take that asset, you could move it from an account in Group A and move it over to Group B. You can trade it more if you want to have more open borders. Certain jurisdictions have more open border financial policies. You can go and you can work in different jurisdictions, and that's where we see the future of tokenization going. I think that financial services as an industry is still adapting to tokenization, and it's good to get comfortable with where we are with tokenization first before we start breaking down borders and building a fully integrated multi-jurisdictional group that can move assets freely around the world. That's the future, but we're looking at right now. People need to move assets to make sure that they're more secure, that they're easily viewable, that you have better compliance, better auditability. Those are the things that we really see driving adoption of tokenization.
For sure, that's a great explanation. And I'll jump right into it. Right, I've been in and around the world of finance, my entire career, and there are so many extremely bright people in financial services. And I think a lot of the times, they start with risk assessment, right? How do I quantify, what the risk profile of this action, this investment, this technology, et cetera, before stepping into, perhaps glass half full, like optimism and upside and all the other things. And so it's a long-winded way of setting you up for the idea that, finance in general is not necessarily the fastest moving industry when it comes to, taking that innovative step for all sorts of reasons, regulatory frameworks and otherwise. And so can you talk to us and the audience about how have the conversations been going with you and ICTI within the financial services space? And what are you looking for in terms of the right partner or partners at maybe the executive level? And you could speak to mindset, the institution or organizational level, or just walk us through, because everybody that tends to come on this program is some form of an entrepreneur or an innovator or a pioneer, and we all have the scar tissue to prove it. So I'd love to hear anything about the way you've sized up the industry and where you think those opportunities are, and some of the headwinds and tailwinds.
Sure. When we're looking at the people that are eager to adopt versus the people that are really taking steps to adopt tokenizing, and what we're really seeing is the people that are taking the steps to adopt versus just enthusiastic and glass half full, this is exciting stuff. It's the people that want to take a stepwise approach. Those are the people that we really like working with, because they want to test everything out. They want to make sure that, hey, when we run this, does this match what our accounting is saying? Can we run this alongside of our systems for a while? Can we make this not blockchain-esque for our customers yet? We want to. ICTI doesn't take a very heavy blockchain approach to what we do. We take a very, very stepwise approach. So when we're building with our customers, we're looking at, all right, well, what's your existing process? How are you going and you're issuing your financial assets? Then we're saying, all right, so we can either have you do it the same exact way and you're just running blockchain in the background, or if you want to take a couple of steps forward and you want to see a couple of blockchain-esque things in the front, we can do that. And where we're really, and I know that AI is pretty exciting here, because we have a fully AI-enabled platform. So when somebody's not sure, they want to know, all right, well, how is this going to play out from this market perspective versus that market perspective, this blockchain versus that blockchain for tokenized issuance? That's where our AI enablement allows somebody to explore those opportunities virtually before they say, yeah, this makes sense. Have an explanation that explains, when you're using this token standard versus that token standard, you need to be looking at this regulation versus that regulation. When you have certain market conditions, which approach is going to give you the best opportunities?
That's fascinating. And I correct me if I'm wrong, but would it be fair to say that you're enabling folks to run simulations and then introduce, probability and help them make those better decisions based on the simulations that are, appropriate for them?
Simulation is a pretty cool thing, and I think if I say simulations, it's going to let people's imagination run a little. It's
going to get you in trouble.
We're not simulating possible future market conditions based off of, when we see these assets go parabolic. No, that's not what we're looking at. What we're looking at is, if you're using a certain financial asset structure, does that structure operate? How does that operate? Does it operate in this token standard? Does it operate in that token standard? You don't need to know those things. I think one of the big barriers to entry that a lot of financial service firms are seeing with tokenization is, well, we're not a blockchain company. We don't do tokenized assets. That's the same as saying, we don't do the internet. It's going to be something that's pretty inevitable, and it's not going to be something that everyone's really thinking about. We don't think, we do the internet. We don't do the internet. It's just, that's one of our operating principles. To take a step back, that's all blockchain is. It's a set of technical capabilities that have been grouped together to give you a new foundational set of infrastructure, it's a new set of tools. It's a different way of using the internet or cryptography, and putting those tools together to be able to utilize them for digital assets. And that's really what it is. When you look at traditional assets versus digital assets, it's really just about how you use them. How are you using these tools? You can use those tools in the same way. You just get more capabilities when you use digital assets.
Yeah. And, you have a great way of explaining this stuff that takes a lot of the complexity out of it. And you're maintaining the integrity of the concepts, which I think is awesome. One of the things that we spoke about along with John Stewart, shout out my man, John, before we jumped on, Was this like, I asked you the question, and I know it's like a left field question, but about an artist friend of mine, Kyle Wallach, and he and I were talking a couple of weeks ago about a bunch of awesome, paintings he's just rolling out and people getting really excited about it. And we were talking about the idea of when he sells one of his paintings, it gets sold and then someone owns it. And then eventually, more people buy his paintings and that painting's worth more and then it goes up in value. And, he doesn't get to participate in that per se, but he's a sharp dude. And he was asking me about my thoughts on, effectively, digital assets and NFTs and other things that he thinks about a lot. And you and I and John, we spoke about, that kind of example within the context of tokenization and digital assets. And we moved into, antique cars, which I would love to have a car problem in the very near future. That would be like my ambition in life. But I wonder, could you help the audience understand what we're talking about here through the lens of maybe how tokenization could play out with art or, classic cars, antique cars? Just because, again, I think sometimes folks, they relate really well to things like that they very much understand. And I would love for car collectors and artists and those that manage artists to hear this and potentially get excited about working with you guys and or just in the space in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just do one quick aside to keep with the premise though. We're talking about tokenizing assets. Assets that can be tokenized or digitally issued, as we like to say, can be anything as simple as equity. You have a dividend for that, and it just kind of sits there and has a price on it. Some identifiers. You look at that as that's a digital asset, just as if you take a piece of artwork and you apply all of its environmental information, what temperatures it's stored in, what's the humidity level that it's stored in, the amount of light that it's getting, plus the actual image. You could do 3D scans of objects. You could put that into a digital asset. So when we're talking about what an asset is, it's an asset, everyone will agree, is a store of value. It's what we're talking about now is how does it operate? What does it contain? What is it that's actually the value part of it? So when you're talking about artwork, artwork has, and I'm not an art investor, and as much as I appreciate art, I can't say that I know all the ins and outs of the art investing world, but I'm a car guy. I do love cars.
Nice.
So when we're talking about looking at art as an investment, it's a little bit different than purchasing a piece of artwork that you think is really cool and then just holding on to it and not really thinking about the resale. When we're thinking about tokenized artwork or the tokenized real-world asset, and the real-world asset is a piece of artwork. It exists in the physical world. So how you store it, where you're hanging it, how much light it's exposed to. Think of really priceless Monets hanging in a museum. You're not exposing it to direct sunlight, and that's going to be something that allows it to store its value as a piece of artwork, and also value as an investment. So with a few sensors that can sign the information packets that get sent over to I'm going to use the word NFT, but really it's still a digital asset, to be able to keep the investor of that asset have a true record, an immutable record that states exactly how this real world asset was stored. Now you have a 3D scan of the object, but what tells you how it's being stored today? Was it a super humid day in that storage facility that's storing this priceless piece of artwork? When we're talking about classic cars, it sits there in a museum. If you don't run it, if you don't make sure that engine turns over every couple of weeks or every few months, you're going to be losing the value of that vehicle. But you also don't want to have somebody go and secretly track that vehicle and go and push it up to 90, 130 miles an hour on the track and get G-forces on it. So you put the right sensors, that pertain to what is going to determine the value of this particular asset. You make sure that that can connect back to that digital asset.
Awesome. Very cool. And I know in the private equity space, lots of folks that love classic cars and art. We had talked a little bit about private equity, and I don't know if there's an example you want to give of how private equity, in particular as an industry and the asset class that they operate within, how they benefit. But there's a pretty healthy segment of my audience that's in that world too, which I know they would love to talk about cars and art, but I think they want to talk about business too. So maybe we could talk about a little private equity within the world of ICTI as well.
Sure. So we're seeing a lot of interest from the private equity space. Where we're seeing it is when there's not enough public issuance going on, or IPOs of some of these portfolio companies, private equity firms are wanting to find different types of exit strategies, and tokenizing a segment of PE firms' portfolio is a wonderful way of being able to create liquidity for some of those assets. You can either tokenize those equity holdings. You can package those equity holdings and issue the shares of that package of assets. So there's a lot of different options in the private equity space, and I think that that's where we're going to see tremendous amount of adoption of tokenization. And when we're talking about AI and being able to enable these firms to tokenize, when we're trying to figure out, well, how do we need to regulate this, or how are we going to be able to do reporting or maintain compliance on these assets? And that's the beauty of having AI enablement. When we go and we're running a set of regulations, having an AI agent going and maintaining all of those regulatory conditions or those KYC conditions that dictate whether or not a person's able to purchase this asset, having that be enforced through blockchain principles. You can't go and you can't fudge something on the blockchain. It messes up the entire historical block, all of the historical blocks in the chain. So you can't go and mess around with it. So that's where we see the blockchain security and the AI enablement really lowering that barrier to entry, getting a lot more firms into the space.
Yeah, that for sure. And one of the things that really caught my attention in, I believe it was a blog post or a white paper you guys had written, but it was this notion of how native AI is to what your core infrastructure, your core technology, what you've built, versus being more of a bolt-on. And simultaneously, I think that whether you're talking about the industry of finance or otherwise, or some other industry, you can name them. We're all experiencing the difference between the technical overhang or the deployment overhang and all that people and process stuff that's inherent in trying to get people to perhaps alter the way they're doing things to benefit from this incredible horsepower that we all are now, we all have access to. And so it's a way to bring it back to, I think you guys have done a really good job at helping people understand that that AI is native to what you've built and not a bolt-on. And of course, not asking you to talk about your competition per se, but maybe talking about the alternative of what's the difference between the way that ICTI has built what it's built, and therefore the benefit of the utility and the use of it, versus folks that maybe have treated AI as retrofitting or a bolt-on and so on and so forth, and kind of the differences between them?
Yeah. When we're looking at AI, we interact with it as users as, hey, there's this great AI tool that I can use that'll do any number of things. Now, that's not going to be the way that you necessarily want to implement it in large financial service firm or even a small financial service firm that does so many different complex tasks, you need to really break it down. And this goes back to my sledgehammer versus a nice little jewelry hammer analogy. The way that we're approaching it is we approach each of these smaller individual tasks that need to get done that are operational in both an issuance and operational and post-issuance, post-trade of different types of digital assets. By having different AI enablement every step of the way, when we want to go and run a scenario or we have a much more broad scope question that we need to resolve, we have much more task-specific agents that are able to give us the pieces necessary across the entire life cycle. And that really enables us to say, we can look at this in a few different perspectives. We really want to see people utilizing AI. There is some value when you say, we had already implemented this amazing process, and now we're putting AI, a giant LLM model on top of it to tell us what to do. You're going to get some value. I'm not going to say AI is not valuable in that context, but when you're approaching it from the ground up with how you're building infrastructure, with how you're building databases, with how you're approaching regulation A versus regulation B, is it different? Do you need to have different approaches there? And when you do, just like you might have different specialists come in to advise you, you're going to want to have different AI tools for each of those different scenarios.
Can you go a little deeper on the task-specific dimension of the agent and/or workflow dimensions? That part right there, I just wonder if you could go a little further on that, because I think that's really intriguing.
Sure. So when we work in a highly regulated environment, we're a good amount of interest that we're getting is from central banks to issue sovereign debt. So for us, that working in regulated environments is super important. We want to make sure that we're approaching things in a very, obviously it needs to be compliant, but we want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that can be transparent. But with AI, there's this other factor. It's making sure that our outcomes are deterministic. A lot of what you see when you're using large language models is you'll get one answer for one person, you get a different answer for a different person, or even the same person gets a different answer 5 minutes later. That's part of the beauty of a large language model. But when you're coming up with decisions that are based off of certain regulations, you need to make sure that you're getting the same answer. It needs to be deterministic. And I think saying the word deterministic for some of the people that are really in the blockchain world, I think they're going to appreciate that, because deterministic outcomes is the basis of consensus models. So I guess the one side, the blockchain side, feeds the AI side for us. When we're looking at small tasks, certain tasks need to be deterministic. Certain tasks, it might be good to be able to interpret something differently. And by us approaching it in such a granular way, what does each task require? How do we need the outcomes to be? It means that we need to be using different types of AI technology in different areas of the life cycle of these assets.
Yeah, and I want to be cognizant of time here, so maybe this is last question or two, but I wanted to ask you, just because you're so close to it, what do you think the one or two things are that a lot of folks get wrong when they try to introduce and deploy AI in these regulated environments, and why do you think that is?
Well, one or two things. I like that you gave me the option, not just the number one thing. I would say that number one, I would say that what I like is, good question.
Take your time. we got all the time we need.
When we're thinking about what people get wrong versus right, I can't say that there's going to be a wrong way to do something. We have a lot of innovators on this call. They're going to be able to see the benefit of different outcomes, or it's going to take them somewhere. When you go and you implement a large language model or a very generalist AI on top of many different types of data, many different pieces of data, sure, you're going to draw connections from different sides of an organization or different sides of your data that you never thought about. You might be able to get some value from it. It might not be very valuable, some of the insights that come around. When you take specific approaches to what type of technology you're using, what type of AI you're using on specific data sets, specific processes, you're going to see really great outcomes. You're going to have a desired outcome. You're going to use technology. It's a very scientific approach, yes, but you're going to see a lot more value more immediately when you take that very specific approach. The other, in these highly regulated environments, I like that part of your question, we see that there's a lot of question marks around what is the information that's used to support this model? What is the outcome? How is the outcome used? What was used to produce this outcome? What prompt went into it? And that's where, for us, having that blockchain component, being able to secure the manner in which you're interacting with the different AI technologies, having it secured in that way and having it audited and having that auditability from the blockchain, that's really, I think, that's what really gets people to jump. And I think that's what's really exciting about the way that we're approaching AI-enabled tokenized issuances.
Yeah, great answer. And, anything else you want to share with the audience? Because again, I want to be cognizant of time, but now's your chance before we wrap things up, because I know you got other things you got to do, but we're very grateful for you taking the time to kind of walk through this, Jason, and share your story. And I'll make sure to add links so people can find more about all the different things that we're talking about here. But, without, taking any more of your time than we already have, anything else you want to share with the audience before we wrap things up?
Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you so much for having me on your show, Alec. I think this is really exciting, and I really love this conversation. I guess kind of last couple of points is that we're running some fantastic pilots, but we are really looking for different types of firms, people that are thinking about tokenizing, to people that are actively getting ready to go and do tokenized issuances, different types of assets. Not everyone's a central bank, but there's different types of financial service firms that could really benefit from doing tokenized issuances. So we'd love to hear about different use cases that people come up with, or see, maybe just have an exploratory conversation. We are a startup as well, so we're always looking to have new investors come in. We're always raising. So anyone that's interested from an investment perspective in getting into the space, definitely would love to hear from them as well.
Absolutely. Well, the good news is on that front is that is definitely a healthy segment of my audience, and I'll be sure to include a number of these dimensions of our conversation, the micro essay and then newsletter integration. So really appreciate it. It's been a long time coming for me. It's an area that I'm embarrassed about, that I don't have as much knowledge as I should. And you've helped me get up to speed on this in a much faster way. So thank you for that. And thanks for coming, and hopefully have you on again sometime soon, Jason.
Yeah. Thank you, Alec.
We'll see you.